This is the track list to Cowboy Carter that features two songs called Smoke Hour and Smoke Hour 2. This is the American flag with no stars on the cover of Cowboy Carter. This is the American flag of the original 13 colonies. This is the limited edition cover of Cowboy Carter where Beyonce is smoking a cigar. This was the first major cash crop in America, tobacco. This is Beyonce's turquoise manicure seen throughout her Cowboy Carter era and on the cover of Cowboy Carter. This is one of the most sacred stones to Native Americans, turquoise. This is Beyonce's mom's maiden name, Beyonce, which was a misspelling of the name Beyonce. Tina Knowles' mother, Agnes Darion, was told she just had to be grateful to get a birth certificate and didn't get the correct spelling of Beyonce to Beyonce. She was not granted this decent respect. This is the Carter family, the first vocal group to become country music stars and were among the first groups to record commercially produced country music. This is Leslie Riddle, the African-American musician who helped collect folk songs for the Carter family to record. So what does all of this mean? In this video, I will be breaking down why Beyonce is going back to reclaim the history and symbols of the United States from its colonial beginnings. From slavery and cash crops to the horrors done to Native Americans, this country was founded on stolen land and stolen people. Cowboy Carter is here to set the record straight on why black people are not only welcome in country music, but are country music. Most associate cotton as the main agricultural powerhouse that profited off of slavery, but that actually isn't the case. The most important cash crop in colonial America was tobacco, first cultivated in the Jamestown colony of Virginia by John Rolfe in 1610, who was famous for being the husband of Pocahontas. Yes, the Pocahontas. A short timeline of earlier colonial America you need to understand is the first British colony in Virginia was organized in 1584, and the permanent English settlement of Jamestown, Virginia began in 1607. Remember, John Rolfe started cultivating tobacco in Jamestown in 1610. The United States declared its independence from Great Britain in 1776. The American Revolutionary War ended in 1783, which is when Great Britain recognized U.S. independence. But those first 176 years between 1607 and 1783, the most important cash crop was tobacco. Cotton actually didn't start gaining popularity throughout the plantation system until the 1800s after the Revolutionary War. In 1776, Britain halted imports of tobacco from the colonies in favor of Egyptian and Turkish suppliers. Colonial farmers at this time shifted their efforts to other cash crops such as rice, corn, and cotton to provide food for colonial militias and material for uniforms for the war efforts, hence cotton plantations not booming until the 1800s. John Rolfe made tobacco the most lucrative crop in the Americas, and it served as the economic foundation and currency of the colonies. Tobacco's desirability and value led it to being used as currency in colonies, and it was backed by the gold standard, which established the conversion rate from tobacco to gold. During the tail end of this 176-year period in 1775, the first flag known as the Grand Union or the Continental Flag was adopted. This flag had 13 stripes representing the 13 colonies: New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. The upper inner corner of the flag features the flag of the Kingdom of Great Britain, which the colonies were subjects under until July 4, 1776. I believe this is why on the cover of Cowboy Carter, the flag stars are cut off, because Beyonce is going back to the original colonial history of America in Cowboy Carter. Cultivating tobacco was a very labor-intensive process. Originally, it was done by indentured servants, but African slaves were cheaper labor and soon became the driving force for its production. Tobacco required the entire year to gather seeds, to start them growing, and then transplanting them to the fields once the soil had warmed. Then, the enslaved people had to weed the fields all summer and remove the flowers individually from tobacco plants in order to force more energy into the leaves. Now, we've noticed Beyonce wearing turquoise nails, which both Des and Little Debbie, as well as Bay-Z on X, have dove into, and I believe this is a nod to the Native Americans who are just as harmed by John Rolfe and the tobacco industry. I will tag these creators below. Turquoise is a sacred stone in Native American cultures. Turquoise is said to represent life and the colors of the earth and the sky. Connecting the two, the Navajo believe that a piece of turquoise is actually a piece of the sky fallen to earth. Native American religions, including the Navajo, Acoma Pueblo, are traditionally the Mayans and the Aztecs associated turquoise with spirit communication, healing, and good fortune. Connections between Africans and Native Americans are inextricably tied to the tobacco plantations in early Jamestown all the way to the present day. Before tobacco was cultivated and sold by colonizers, the indigenous people regarded tobacco as a sacred plant which allowed access to the spirit world, a stimulant and medicinal substance. After the Spanish colonized the West Indies, South and Central America, after 1492, tobacco was grown, harvested, and exported as a recreational drug, and its popularity in Europe and elsewhere made it highly profitable. Once the English had established themselves at Jamestown, this model repeated itself, and Virginian tobacco became so popular that by 1627, 500,000 pounds of tobacco a year were shipped from the colony to Britain. Both black and white servants worked the tobacco plantations. However, Africans were treated much worse. In 1640, a black indentured servant, John Punch, ran away from his master, and 2 white indentured servants left with him. When they were all caught, they were returned to the master, but the white servants only had 4 years added to their time. Punch was sentenced to servitude for life. After 1640, relations between blacks and whites increasingly changed as white servants received better treatment. Now, the Powhatans were the Native Americans who lived in eastern Virginia where Jamestown was settled. One of these famous Powhatans was Pocahontas, who was the daughter of the chief of the Powhatans, making her obviously very famous among this Native American tribe. John Rolfe, the man who started the tobacco plantations in Jamestown, married Pocahontas when she was around 18 years old to establish good relations with the Native Americans. Pocahontas allegedly chose to convert to Christianity and chose the name Rebecca as her new baptismal name. They had 1 son, Thomas Rolfe, who today has over 100,000 descendants. In 1616, the Rolfes traveled to London, where Pocahontas was presented to English society as an example of a civilized savage, in hopes of stimulating investment in Jamestown. They toted her around as a refined example of how Native Americans can convert to Christianity. This will be important later on, and be civilized. Pocahontas died around 20 or 21 years old in Kent, England. The toting around of a civilized savage Pocahontas reminds me of the period of civilizing missions that was used to justify colonization of African countries by the French. From about 1870, France began to enlarge its holdings in Africa, and French publicists and politicians declared their government alone among the western states that had a special mission to civilize indigenous people coming under its control. Remember, Beyonce's family tree can be traced back to French colonists from Acadia and Afro-Creole survivors of slavery. The relationship between the white English landowners, white servants, African servants, and local indigenous people of the Powhatan Confederacy was never one of equality, but grew strained and far more unequal as more land was required by colonists for settlements and tobacco plantation, which encouraged not only the displacement of Native Americans, but the development of the slave trade, which brought more free labor. The Powhatan Wars that lasted from 1610 to 1646 altered relations between the colonists and indigenous people. By the time the Third Powhatan War was over, the power of the Powhatan Confederacy had been broken down and many of the Native Americans were enslaved. The end of the war cleared the native land for colonization and cultivation of tobacco, and provided the English with Native American slaves for their fields. Colonists found that Native Americans were not as well suited for the hours of constant labor as those imported from Africa, and so the transatlantic slave trade grew and slavery was institutionalized in Virginia by 1661 and strengthened by a series of laws passed throughout the 1660s. Maryland and Virginia and the Carolina colonies were selling large exports of tobacco, and their economy was only boosted by the selling of these captured Native Americans to plantations in the West Indies. Black men were expected to work the fields, and black women were expected to have babies to create more slaves to be sold and traded. The end of the Powhatan War and the establishment of the eradication of Native Americans through colonization also resulted in Christianizing natives, like they did with Pocahontas, which encouraged their use of tobacco as a recreational drug, recreational being the key word. This cut their ties with their traditional understanding and use of tobacco. Sacred tobacco is not meant to be used or abused for recreational purposes and not used daily but for ceremonial use only. In fact, many tribes do not even inhale sacred tobacco during the ceremonies. Native Americans were not allowed to speak their language or engage in ceremonial dances, and the use of sacred tobacco was banned. Despite hardships, many tribes did not give up their sacred tobacco traditions. They substituted commercial tobacco and continued their ceremonies in secret, risking harassment and/or imprisonment. Some tribes preserved the seeds and knowledge of sacred tobacco, passing them down from generation to generation. However, most tribes lost nearly everything, including land, language, children, and much of their culture. It wasn't until 1978 the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed, which recognized the right of American Indians to practice their religion without interference from the government. Much like the Native Americans, Africans were stripped of their cultures, abused, and treated on a subhuman level. African slaves were forbidden from practicing anything that related to their African culture and heritage. The native Africans had to keep their languages alive in America in secret. When I think of sacred, of course, I think of sacred, Beyonce's hair care line. And what is the most sacred practice of black women and their tribes? Braids. Many African groups braided hair to identify with their tribes, and braids indicated wealth, marital status, power, and religion. During slavery, Africans used braids to communicate escape routes. Captured Africans braided seeds and grains into their hair to bring their foods with them as a way to survival. Rice, okra, peanuts, watermelon are some examples of the seeds and grains that were hidden and brought from their native homeland. No matter what hardship they faced, they found a way to use their sacred rituals as tools and a way to freedom. Interesting, Beyonce is holding a cigar, not a cigarette. African Americans today have the highest rate of cigar use in America. However, like the Native Americans, their ancestors used tobacco in a sacred practice that did not lead to the health conditions that modern-day cigarettes and cigars do. Africans have rituals using tobacco and cigars specifically as a way to connect with the spiritual world, ancestors, and spirits, offering prayers. They believed smoke from the cigar carries prayers and offerings to the spirit world. Cigars are used as gifts for ancestors and spirits and smoked during special ceremonies. Now, Beyonce has paralleled herself to the African goddess Oshun throughout her career. In Mood Forever, off of the Gift album, she sings, "I am the Nala, sister Naruba, Oshun Queen Sheba, I am the mother." In the West African religion of Yoruba, Oshun is the goddess of divinity, femininity, fertility, beauty, and love. She is connected to destiny and divination. She presides over fertility, love, fresh water, and is often depicted in a yellow dress like Beyonce in the Hold Up video. Now, Oshun is one of the Orisha, which is the divine spirits of the Yoruba religion. Now, in the Yoruba religion, there is a cigar ritual that uses cigar smoke as a means of smudging, like you have heard of sage or Palo Santo used in native religions. It is also used in the Orisha-worshipping religions, which is what Yoruba is. And as a tradition or initiation rituals for membership, the ritual involves burning 2 cigars, one to the Orisha and the other for the participants as a method of lifting prayers to the Orisha. Back to keeping traditional lives in secret was through folk tales, which African slaves used as a way of recording their experiences in songs and stories. And what is country music? Folk stories and songs. Basie on X noted the parallel between 16 carriages and work songs. Work songs were an oral tradition of music sung by enslaved people while working or doing any kind of labor. This oral tradition had its roots from traditional African songs and was used to pass on history to generations. It was an integral part of early African music before the recording era and influenced the founding genres of music such as blues and gospel. In 16 Carriages, it follows the cadence of a work song as Beyonce talks about working and touring since she was a teen and how it's been 38 summers since she had the rest. The work songs were sung particularly by women and centered on resilience and spoke of family, which is evident in the lyrics, "I might cook clean but still won't fold. Going so hard now I miss my kids." Connecting back to Cowboy Carter and the Carter family, known as the first family of country music, they worked with the African-American musician Leslie Riddle, who influenced the Carter family, helping them shape country music. Little Debbie has covered this in a lot of her videos as well. Riddle and Carter embarked on a song-collecting trip around the region, going door to door to collect these folk and work songs that were passed down in oral tradition. Riddle would act as a human tape recorder, memorizing the melodies while the Carters gathered lyrics. Folklore has not only helped African Americans record large-scale events, but it helped individual family genealogy too. Having an aspect of genealogy in folklore makes African American history not only traceable but more approachable. These stories relate to specific people, their experiences, and the places they lived. They are not mythical tales, but stories about real people and what happened to them. They demonstrate and track the fight for freedom and independence. Now, we've established the resilience of Black and Native American people to keep their stories alive, but the effects of colonialism have caused generational pain and trauma on mass scales that corporations, the new colonizers, still profit off of today. Bringing it to the present day, in 2024, the tobacco revenue in the United States amounted to $107.5 billion. And who are the victims of recreational tobacco usage more than any other group? Native Americans and African Americans. Firstly, Native Americans smoked tobacco as a sacred practice, as I mentioned before. It was not used every day, and it was also not full of chemicals like the modern-day cigarette. However, the Christianization and forgetting of their sacred roots led them to use tobacco recreationally. According to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, American Indians have the highest smoking rates and the lowest quit rates among all racial and ethnic groups in the United States. Many suffer from the health consequences of commercial tobacco use, such as cancer, heart disease, and diabetes. In the past 2 decades, some tribes have fought to regain what they have lost by researching and re-educating themselves and then passing that knowledge on to their children and grandchildren. Similarly, tobacco companies have a long history of trying to influence African American people by donating to historically Black colleges and universities, sponsoring scholarships for African American students, including HSBCU universities like the ones Beyonce honored in her homecoming special at Coachella. These tobacco companies also give money to influential African American people, officials, and organizations. Tobacco companies have advertised more heavily in magazines with larger numbers of African American readers. Neighborhoods and areas with more African American residents tend to have more stores that sell tobacco. Tobacco companies promote and advertise at community events in majority Black neighborhoods and use hip-hop and rap to promote their products. This brings me to Newports. The menthol cigarette heavily marketed and sold to African Americans. Menthol cigarettes are a leading cause of death among Black Americans. 81% of Black smokers use menthols compared to 34% of white smokers. And there's a reason for that, says Keith Wailu, author of the book Pushing Cool, Big Tobacco, Racial Marketing, and the Untold Story of the Menthol Cigarette. In the U.S., companies use predatory marketing to target Black customers with menthol cigarettes, worsening the disproportionate health harms to Black communities from smoking. Meanwhile, they preach support for Black Lives Matter and racial justice. In June 2020, Altria, the American corporation and one of the largest producers and makers of tobacco and cigarettes, announced it would provide $5 million to fight racial inequality. The industry's effort to target black consumers began after the Second World War as communities became more urbanized and increased in spending power. Additionally, studies have found greater tobacco retail density nationwide in census tracts with higher proportion of African American residents. The more tobacco retailers, the more exposure to tobacco marketing individuals face. In fact, retail marketing, including in-store advertising, product displays, and discounts, account for a large portion of the tobacco industry's marketing budget. In 2020, Big Tobacco spent 97% of their total cigarette and smokeless tobacco advertising and promotional budgets on strategies that facilitated retail sales, such as price discounts, point-of-sale advertising, coupons, and payments to ensure prime retail space. The tobacco industry has also misappropriated culture and traditional tobacco by misrepresenting American Indian traditions, values, and beliefs to market and sell their products for profit. One of the first products to exploit Native American identity was the Red Man chewing tobacco, introduced in 1904 by Pinkerton Tobacco and is still sold today by Swedish Match. In response to criticism, one cigarette manufacturer highlighted how much money they gave to Native American charities and the free tobacco offered for ceremonial purposes. "We'd like to think we're giving something back to these people in exchange for using this imagery," he said. Rather than confront a history of colonialism and racism, Big Tobacco uses philanthropy and corporate social responsibility programs to distract from the past and present misdeeds. Third parties or front groups are employed to create the facade of independent and influential support. In the 1950s, the cigarette industry began to focus on promoting filtered cigarettes as a response to the emerging scientific data about the harmful effects of smoking. Under the misconception that filtered cigarettes were safer, Marlboro as well as other brands started to be sold with filters. However, Marlboro cigarettes were seen as feminine, and when it comes to the Marlboro Man, the rugged cowboy, was created to popularize filtered cigarettes. So here comes Beyonce now, Cowboy Carter, riding in on a horse with a traditional cigar used in African Yoruba rituals, wearing a sash with the name Beyonce, reclaiming it for her grandmother who was denied a proper birth certificate for her daughter. This is all about reclamation. Do you see how America has a problem still? Colonizers imprisoned Native Americans, stole their land to grow tobacco plantations, then bought and sold slaves from Africa to tend to growing these incredibly difficult crops so they could profit off of it to the point of establishing the literal economy of America. Then hundreds of years later, those same people are running corporations and targeting Native Americans and African American communities, marketing their highly chemicalized, addictive, and processed tobacco, getting people addicted and pulled away from their traditional roots and sacred rituals, using tobacco because they have been Christianized and forgotten what is sacred to their bloodlines. They are marketed to and told to use tobacco recreationally, to the point that the same two groups that made tobacco such a huge cash crop that established America are the same two groups that are most negatively affected by tobacco, making it a leading cause of death and other lung, heart, and cancerous diseases, which, guess what, only make drug companies profit more. Many of these people become addicted because they are marginalized, stressed, and depressed, dealing with intergenerational historical trauma from having their same ancestors' land and wealth stolen, traditions eradicated, and families abused. This makes them more susceptible to becoming addicted to cigarettes. They are hesitant to even seek help for their addictions because of how medical institutions have caused them harm. Also, much of modern-day country music is Christian, which they use to justify abuse towards quote-unquote sinners. This is the same mindset that colonizers used when Christianizing native indigenous people, saying they were savage and needed to be civilized by Christianity. The Christians became the colonizers, and the colonizers became the corporation. Today's country music is the most inauthentic expression of what true country music is. It has been bastardized and co-opted by a community and lineage of racist bullshitters whose families profited off of plantation owners and ain't seen a lick of real struggle in their life. They don't know nothing about what real country music is and have the audacity to say Beyonce isn't welcome in the genre. Well, Beyonce's family history is the genre of country music. Country music is about the struggles in song form passed down intergenerationally, and that's what this Cowboy Carter album is about. Cowboy Carter is not a country album. This is a Beyonce album.